Has anybody here ever seen the moon through a telescope or a pair of binoculars? Yeah. Has anybody here ever seen the Rings of Saturn through a telescope? Of those of you who have seen the Rings of Saturn, have you ever seen the Rings of Saturn through a little telescope and not gone, oh, wow? Because that's what you do. Because that's what human beings do. And everybody in the village is going, oh, wow. And when I set it up back in Michigan, where I grew up, everybody would go, oh, wow. And I realized, at that time I had a very, very clever cat. Now, my cat was much better at being a cat than I ever could be. But my cat never wanted to look through the telescope. This is something that human beings do. This is one of the things that makes us more than just well-fed cows. This is something that feeds our souls, along with music, along with dance, along with literature, along with knowing your history, along with praying. Because we don't live by bread alone. I'd read that someplace. And that's why you do astronomy, even when people are starving in the world. And I got so excited, I came back to America and got a teaching job, and I enjoyed teaching so much that I entered the Jesuits so I could teach at a small college, and instead they sent me to Rome, where they said, vow of obedience. I had to live in a palace and eat that terrible food and look at that work. But that inspiration is why I do science. Why is science done by a community? Not every community does science. The Chinese had thousands of years of phenomenal philosophy and never were interested in working out the laws of physics. The Hindus had incredible mathematics. And they could predict eclipses because they were useful for doing astrology. Not because they actually asked, what's going on up there? Every logical system, science is a logical system, every logical system has to start with assumptions. You probably learned in school Euclid's geometry. And Euclid's geometry starts with Euclid's axioms. If you have 2 points, you can draw a straight line between them. It'll be the shortest distance. If you have 2 parallel lines, they will never meet. The first one is so obvious you don't even have to explain otherwise. The second one turns out isn't true in every geometry, but it's the assumption that Euclid starts with. And from it develops all sorts of other wonderful things. But you cannot do science, you cannot do mathematics, you cannot live your life without these assumptions. It's the cosmos that's in your head. There are certain fundamental assumptions you have to make about the universe before you can do science with the universe. And these assumptions are actually religious assumptions. And by that I mean there are religions that don't believe in these assumptions. For instance, so obvious you don't even think of it, you have to believe the universe exists. I'm not the figment of somebody else's imagination. You're not the figment of my imagination. I can't prove it. There's the famous story of the Zen master who was dreaming he was a butterfly, and when he woke up he goes, was that me, the Zen master, dreaming he was a butterfly? Or am I a butterfly dreaming that I'm a Zen master? You can't prove it. There's a whole philosophy called solipsism that says the universe is a projection of my imagination. There was apparently a story once when George Bernard Shaw was giving these lectures on philosophy and mentioned solipsism. Somebody came up to him afterwards and said, but Dr. Shaw, I am a solipsist. So are most of my friends. You have friends? Never mind. It's a religious assumption. We assume, knowing that our knowledge of the universe is based on our senses, and our senses are limited, and sometimes we don't see as well as we might. Nonetheless, we start with the assumption of realism, that there's actually a real universe for us to study. If you didn't have that, you wouldn't do any study. Second assumption, we assume that the physical universe operates according to laws. Why would we look for the laws of the universe if we didn't think they were there ahead of time? But who was the first person to suggest that the universe might operate by regular laws? Where'd that idea come from? You know, before you knew that any laws were there and that they worked, why would you think? You could claim maybe Aristotle. Aristotle had a system of observing how the universe worked, and it was essentially common sense. But Aristotle's system was kind of sterile. It lasted 1,500 years and never really developed much beyond what Aristotle said. One thing you have to believe, if you believe that the universe operates by laws that science can do things with, is that means you cannot believe in the nature laws of the ancient Greeks and Romans. Lightning bolt hits the church. It's because the god of lightning bolts was throwing that lightning bolt. Crops grow on your garden and not on hers. It's because the goddess Ceres likes you and doesn't like her. Everything that happens in the world happens by these nature gods. And if that's the case, number one, I can't disprove it. Number two, I've been able to perfectly explain everything that happens. It's the whim of some god. And you see this in literature. There's Prometheus Bound, I think is the play, where there's a war between a monster under the mountains of Turkey, Cilicia. And he's fighting this war, and Zeus is fighting back. And the monster lives under the mountains and has got glowing red eyes and is attacking the heaven. And then you look at what's in that part of Turkey? Volcanoes. What are they describing? The eruption of a volcano. What happens when volcanoes erupt? It throws all this dust in the air, which we would say in our modern cosmology creates a low conductive path for lightning to come back down and hit the mountain. They're seeing the same thing we're seeing, but their operating system, their cosmos says, you don't believe in the gods? Look, there he is. But then comes Christianity, which doesn't believe in the gods, which says there is one God, and that God is not the God inside nature, but the God who is outside nature. That God who is not only outside nature, but who created nature. So we start at the very beginning of Genesis. In the beginning, God's already there. God's already there in the beginning. Before space and time has been made, God's already there. So God makes space and time. God operates outside is the only word we can use, even though outside and inside doesn't make any sense. I don't have any other ways to describe it. God is supernatural. And that's the only God, which even goes beyond the Jews who said, our God is better than all the other gods. Christianity is saying, our God is the only God. And if you thought you were worshiping some other God, you're really worshiping the one true God. You didn't even realize it. To the unknown God. And that whole wonderful story of St. Paul. This has a lot of philosophical implications. Stephen Weinberg, a Nobel Prize winner who was at Harvard, actually, when I was at Harvard, he got the Nobel Prize, and I did, because he was smarter than me. And he writes this book later on about, the more we understand the universe, the more it appears to be pointless. And you say, that's modern science has made the universe pointless. It's not modern science that makes the universe pointless, because the point he's trying to make was made 2,300 years ago, much more poetically, by the author of the book of Ecclesiastes, who starts out, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. Rabbi Sachs has translated this, I think, beautifully as meaningless, meaningless, says the teacher. Everything is meaningless. Everything is under the sun that withers and dies, whether it's grass or human beings. What's the point of it all? Doesn't take modern science to recognize that if you're looking for your meaning within the universe itself, you'll never find it. Wittgenstein points out that a chair, this bench that you're sitting on, there's a reason for that bench. And the reason is to support you, because you're not the bench. Without you, that bench would be purposeless. There'd be no point to the purpose. Without something outside the universe, supernatural, there would be no meaning for the universe. Well, that's the philosophical side. What about the science side? If there are no nature gods, then we've got to come up with another explanation for what that red glow was. It wasn't the nasty eyes of Titus. And what that lightning bolt was, it wasn't the throw of Zeus. So where did those things come from? How did that happen? These questions, not as a sense of, well, I've got the book of answers, it's called Aristotle, but in the sense of, here are some questions we can have a conversation about and continue to think about and grow and develop. Where does that happen in the medieval universities? Where does that happen in the schools of the Jewish philosophers, Maimonides and others? Where does it happen in the Arab schools? What do these three groups have in common? We all believe in Genesis. We all believe in the book that tells us that there is one God, not nature gods, and that this God is responsible for the universe, because there's a third thing that you have to believe before you can do science. Before you can do science, you've got to, number one, have enough education to know where things have gotten to from now, so you can get into the conversation. Number two, you've got to have people to talk to, because it's a conversation. You can't do it alone. What I always tell my students, especially in lab classes, if you don't write it down, it didn't happen. Number three, somebody's got to pay the bills. Because let's face it, the people who are doing science at Cambridge, at the moment, it looks pretty useless. It's not putting food on the table. They say Faraday in the 19th century did a lot of these experiments on electricity. And the story goes, Disraeli shows up to the lab, sees all these big flashing sparks, and goes, well, what possible use is this? and Faraday says to the Prime Minister, he says, Mr. Prime Minister, someday you'll be able to put a tax on it. The usefulness, though, is in the future. Why is it worthwhile doing now? It's worthwhile if you believe that God speaks to us through creation. And I didn't invent that idea. Since the beginning of time, God has made himself known in the things he has made. First letter to the Romans, chapter 1, verse 20-something or another. If I were a Protestant, I'd remember which verse. If you believe that the physical universe is an expression of the Creator, then you can go to the society that's interested and dedicated to loving and getting close to that Creator, the medieval society, and you can say, I'll teach your kids how to do the math they need to become good business people if you let me do this other stuff on the side. And it's a kind of an informal deal that's done. Nobody ever says it quite that loudly, but that's how it works. And it works because the whole society is willing to carry it along. So when we say that, Neil Armstrong went to the moon, Neil Armstrong was just the guy at the top of the rocket. There was a whole rocket underneath him. And I don't just mean the physical rocket. There was the person who trained him, the person who chose him, the person who designed the rocket, the person who built the rocket, the person who built the roads that allowed the pieces of the rocket to become assembled, the people who worked in the cafeteria, feeding the people who built the rocket, the people who trained, it was the entire society. One of the things, if you look at the history of medieval thought, by the middle of the 13th century, they were ready to have what we call the Renaissance. They were ready to break out of, there are a lot of ideas of people like Nicholas of Cusa and John Buridan that look and sound an awful lot like what Newton's going to say 300 years later. What happened? The Black Death. The plague comes in, wipes out a third of Europe, wipes out 2/3 of the clergy. And who's doing the science in those days? The people at the universities who were the clergy. They could afford to do it, they didn't have kids. And it's not until the end of the 16th century that there are enough people back in the population of Europe has gotten back to the point where there's a big enough economy that 1/2 of 1% can do some good to develop into what we call science. So everybody in this room is necessary for somebody to be able to send a probe to Mars. We need every one of you. Why would everyone go along with this? Because everyone believes that it's worth doing. More than that, when I was in grad school, I had a friend, Cliff, who came from blue-collar neighborhood, Buffalo, New York, Rust Belt, and really bright guy. But his dad was a bartender. He came to that point in grad school studying physics that every student comes to more than once, where you thought, I thought I was pretty smart, but I just don't get Bessel functions. It just doesn't make any sense. And I've been studying it and studying it and studying it, and I'm just stuck. And when it happened to me, I looked at my MIT ring and I go, Guy, shut up, you went to MIT. Go back and do it. He didn't have that. He called up his mom, just sort of like, life is tough. And his mom goes, Cliff, why are you doing this to yourself? You can come home, open up a TV repair shop, make a good living, which he could have. Until nobody repaired TVs anymore. If you don't have not just a society, but your own family who are going to be proud of you. I gave a talk about astronomy at the College of Charleston, South Carolina. You probably have this idea of South Carolina. Probably it's not all wrong. Kid comes up and he says, I love what you want to do. I want to study geology. Great, I do geology of planets. He says, I want to study geology. What do I tell my mom? Because he's coming from a world where the geologists are the enemy, and there's going to have to reject his idea of what the Bible means, and he's going to have to reject their idea of what the Bible means, and his mom isn't going to be proud of him. She's going to be ashamed of him. Do you think he's going to go into geology? Look at it in a slightly different point of view. India, big place, 1.2 billion people there. They've been known to have a few mountains. You may have heard of the Himalayas. Some snow on the mountains. Snow in Hawaii, why not? Of all that snow and all that mountain and all those people, how many Indians have ever won a gold medal in the Winter Olympics? And the answer is none. Because their culture doesn't say, boy, wouldn't it be cool to get that downhill medal. There are moms in India who are eager